Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of TideIllustrated.com. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sikalis coming back for a recap. We waited till Sunday. It was a longer travel weekend this weekend, so we waited till Monday to record this one to recap Alabama's 42-10 win over Wisconsin. The Tide goes into Big Ten country, gets the win, also injures the Badgers starting quarterback. So there might be some lingering love lost from Wisconsin fans, an unfortunate situation for Tyler Van Dyke. That was one situation in this game, Tony, but Alabama comes in, gets the win, first Power 4 win, first road win. What did you make of the game, the experience in Camp Randall, and everything here as Alabama moves to 3-0 on the season?
Yeah, it's kind of what I expected on various fronts. I mean, I think Camp Randall lived up to its expectations. It's a nice stadium. I really like the press box was cool. The fans were, the only thing I think I didn't like about the atmosphere is not so much that the fans left after jump around. I think that was expected in a blowout. It's that the student section took too long to come into the game. You would think with like a big time matchup that those students would be there. I was a little bit disappointed, but then once they were there, it was rocking. It was fun. I mean, it's kind of hard because, like you said, Tyler Van Dyke gets hurt, early on in the game. Alabama kind of pulls ahead, and it's like not much for the home crowd to cheer about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed the atmosphere. I enjoyed jump around. This Alabama offense keeps on making plays, and then the defense. I think the defense really came to play. Now I get that the Badgers didn't have their starting quarterback, but you look at the performance of LT Overton. You wrote about him this morning. He was great. Q Robinson gets another sack. Jahad Campbell is playing his way into like a possible first round pick. He had a good game. Keon Sabb had a good game. I mean, the defense really did well, as good as the offense did. I think I was pretty pleased with what I saw on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, that's where we should start is the defense, and just touching on the atmosphere too. I too enjoyed the game. It was fun. Got to go on the field a little bit and kind of see things from down below. I know Nate Oates, Wisconsin native, was in attendance, going back to his home state for a little bit. Just got a recruit from there as well, so he's turned a little bit of a pipeline. But it was a fun time. It was definitely, I think, a unique experience. There were a good amount of Alabama fans there, even just walking around the streets of Madison, seeing people in Bama shirts and Bama gear who'd made the trip up. I saw one license plate, which, respect to you, like a straight up Alabama themed Alabama plate, like had definitely driven up.
Could have just been someone from Alabama, right? Maybe they were just living in
maybe.
Wisconsin.
Yeah, but they still had an Alabama plate. I mean, maybe they just hadn't switched over yet, or
I don't know.
just chose not
maybe.
to. But yeah, I respect the hustle if they did indeed make that entire drive. But yeah, on the field, I think that is where we should start is the defense. And you mentioned a bunch of those guys. It just kind of felt like a solid performance. Like you said, they were going against a backup quarterback for most of the game, but Wisconsin, you always knew was going to be a lot more ground heavy, and neither Braden Locke, their backup, or Tyler Van Dyke are necessarily explosive runners. So you didn't really have much of a change of play style when that happened. But just your overall thoughts. And we heard from Kane Womack today. He said straight up that heading into the bye week, Alabama hasn't really unleashed its full swarm defense package yet. And, he kind of talked about sort of budgeting the plays and the calls that you use for later on in the season, especially having to face so many good SEC offenses. With that in mind now, what did you make of this performance against kind of this first Power 4 opponent?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty impressive. Look, the one thing that, Kane Womack said was unacceptable during that South Florida game was the lack of turnovers. And Alabama forced 3 turnovers, 3 forced fumbles, and it really almost had 4. If you look at that, Keon Sabb almost had a pick over the middle. So that would have been 4. They won the turnover battle, which is something that, is a big deal for both sides of the ball. But I think, that's one of the priorities that Kane Womack puts on his defense, is really an emphasis on getting the ball out, creating those turnovers. So they were able to do that. I thought that was big. Obviously, it does play a role in having an inexperienced quarterback, but I like the pressure they were able to get, on the passer, like we talked about LT Overton. But I mean, like even up the middle, I mean, Tim Keenan I thought he was big, clearing through some of the offensive line, and they weren't really able to run the ball like they were, like South Florida was. So, I was pretty impressed with what I saw from the defense. As far as like not laying out the whole defense, I don't think that's necessarily a surprise. That makes sense. They really haven't gone against a quarterback per se that especially when Tyler Van Dyke was out. But I don't even know if he would have been a quarterback that could really pick them apart. But they haven't faced that yet. So what's the point in providing some looks to a Georgia who has Carson Beck and allowing them to see stuff that you don't need to show yet? So, I mean, that makes sense. I think now you're getting an SEC play. You're going to have to, unload the holster a little bit and just really, it's going to take everything to win some of these next few games. So it's kind of a luxury if you can get by doing it and hiding some stuff in the first part of the season. I don't think you're going to be able to hide much, from here on out. I'm wondering, Nick Sheridan didn't talk about it, but is the offense holding some stuff back? And that's something I mentioned a little bit in my column, but I mean, maybe, we heard today, Alabama's coaches were talking high about the performance that, Kendrick Law did without the ball in his hands. Some of the blocking, you can look on X and see some of these, clips of him just blocking, in open space and really showing off his physicality. That 400-pound bench press that Kalen DeBoer talked about in the offseason. I mean, he did well with blocking, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Alabama utilizes him a little bit more. He still only has one reception, and it was a 22-yard touchdown against South Florida. Was it South Florida or was it Western Kentucky?
It was Western Kentucky that he got.
Western Kentucky. So that was 2 games ago. That was his only reception. He was supposed to be a guy that was a big-time playmaker. I wonder if they're holding back and maybe they have some screen games, some intermediate. I don't necessarily think this offense is going to ever really be intermediate, but maybe they have some short stuff that can open up the field a little bit against Georgia that they can unveil. I think he would probably be the best way to do that. Get a guy that can really move, get out in open space. If they start crowding the box, he can kind of shove people towards the perimeter because you can just fire out a quick screen to him. And he's a guy that kind of runs the ball like a running back. So I like him as a possible secret weapon that they haven't used yet. Because they're going to need something. I don't know if this, chuck it to Ryan Williams deep is going to work against Georgia. It's worked against everybody else. So you almost get to the point where let's just see if it works against Georgia, because it wasn't supposed to work this well against Wisconsin, and it did. So we'll see how this big play offense goes, but you have to be pretty pleased with what you saw from the offense in week 3. They went against a Big Ten team. They scored 6 touchdowns. Jalen Milroe has 14 touchdowns to 3 games. I mean, do the math on that. He's going to have 50 touchdowns this season combined, and it's just I mean, if he keeps it up, obviously, but I think that, there is something to how Alabama can move the ball on offense, and they're always a play away from, hitting a home run. Until somebody stops it, you almost got to give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe.
Yeah, I think, and we can kind of get into some of those playmakers, because when I did read your column, I was so surprised by that. I even didn't realize, and I've been watching all these games, that Kendrick Law's only had the 1 catch for 22 yards, and he hasn't done anything in the receiving game since. And yeah, it feels like a guy with as much of the growth that was predicted for him, and then some of the stuff we were hearing in the offseason about his physical development and just his expected role in this offense. Like, you can't foresee him staying at that slim of a target amount and that little of a usage rate for the entire season. Like, he's definitely got to get involved more. And then Ryan Williams, I mean, I saw a stat. He's put up better numbers in his first 3 games than I think, guys like Julio and Calvin Ridley has been able to get more involved. I know Jalen Milroe, made a really nice throw that people were asking about in the touchdown play that he had. And then even Jeremy Bernard, who, aside from dissing jump around and having to apologize for it to his teammates, has been pretty darn great as well. So, I wonder, you're right, how much the playmaking has impacted, you're allowed to just kind of rely on these deep plays because you have a lot of these talented guys. And then what else did you make of Milroe's performance? I mean, it is one of those things where at this point in the season, even if you haven't seen all of what you wanted to see, the numbers don't lie. That puts you in New York by December, if that rate keeps up where it's keeping up.
There are obvious flaws in his game. He's not a perfect quarterback. And that you look to some of the plays by the red zone where, Alabama kind of benefited one time off of not a false start, an offsides penalty that gave him a second life, and then Jalen ran it in. I don't know how they're going to score if they can't throw the ball in those areas. Like if they drive inside the 10 against Georgia, I don't think you're just going to be able to out athlete Georgia and get Milroe on the edge. Maybe you can, but when the field gets shorter, I think you're going to have to pass a little bit better. That said, he's dynamic. He's the most athletic, maybe outside of Travis Hunter. I think he's the most athletic college football player in the nation. I really do. Just in terms of everything he can do with his arm, with his legs. He's got he can throw it a million miles. He's can power it through defenders. He can tuck the ball, and he's just electric. You really can't say enough about just everything he can do. He's just got to, he's got to be kind of more consistent with it. I think one of the things that, that was pointed out today on Monday is that, he's gotten better at changing his protections on the offensive line. And that's going to help with, the draw game where Alabama can, I think he's seeing a little bit more. I think with the Ryan Williams play, he saw that he had cover one and that basically Ryan was going to be open there. I think that's a sign of maturity. And then he had a beautiful pass. It resulted in a big play. So it's almost like Jalen Milroe doesn't get credit for the big plays because he makes so many of them. And he almost I feel like sometimes, you'd almost rather see like a 15-yard pass than a 50-yard pass. And that's probably not the case. Obviously you want to get as many yards as possible. But I thought that was there are some signs of maturity in his game. It does need to get better. I don't think, he's going to have to improve even in this bye week. But that's the thing about Jalen is everyone that talks about him talks about how much he is dedicated to improvement. I don't think he's a finished product. It's just a matter of, can he get to be closer to a finished product as Alabama gets into these bigger games? We'll have to see. I think we're just going to learn so much about the Georgia game, or so much about Alabama in the Georgia game.
Mm-hmm.
I think if they can hang with Georgia, they can hang with anyone. And if they just get demolished and they can't move the ball against Georgia, I think that's a huge red flag because they're going to face other good defenses. They're going to face other teams like Tennessee too you're going to have to score and move the ball consistently because that offense is just electric. And same with Texas if they have to end up playing them. It's just something that this is going to be the season. I wrote in my column, the season starts now. I think this is the real test. I think the first three games, those opponents weren't going to beat Alabama, and now you're starting to face the bullies. You're going into the SEC season. It means more, Jack.
It does. Yeah, I think, and I don't think it should be taken as a scary thing to say we're going to find out more about Alabama in this Georgia game for the exact reasons you just said. I think, yes, we would have found out a lot about Alabama if they would have lost one of these first three games, but they didn't. They got through it. They got through it relatively comfortably. You can see where the holes are. Now let's see how deep they are. I think that's really what's going to be revealed. And then the two other things I'll add in with Milroe that I just thought were interesting from this game and what we heard on Monday. I mean, Sheridan said straight up to him, I appreciated this honesty. He said he told Milroe, this is how it's going to be your whole career. It's always going to be, you have to make lists and see what was wrong in the last game and kind of have this constant obsession with getting better, but eventually you're going to have to see that manifest. And when it comes to winning time, that's when it's got to be there. Cause that's what'll, define how valuable you are as a draft pick, as a player, all that stuff.
And to Jalen's credit, he beat Georgia last year. I mean, let's not forget that. We're going to talk all this. Oh, can it work against Georgia? Can it work against Georgia? It did last year. I mean, it's a different offense, but I mean, I think, Alabama's got a better offensive line, or, the offensive line. That's one thing we can, take from the Wisconsin game. The offensive line looked better than it did last year. And I like DeBoer and Nick Sheridan as play callers better than I like Tommy Rees. And I'm really, and Tommy Rees did make some strides at the end of last year, but I like those two better at utilizing Jalen's skills. So we'll see. I mean, maybe we're overrating Georgia and not giving Alabama enough credit. But I think you're right about the improvement, but also got to give him credit for he's already done more than I think maybe we're giving him credit for.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it. That's the other thing that they were very clear about. DeBoer was after the game. He was clear. He repeated it on Monday. Nick Sheridan repeated it on Monday. It's a lot easier for Milroe to have success when he has time to throw and when he can make the kind of checks that he can make, because they did in fact have a healthy offensive line, which I think was another big takeaway from from Wisconsin. I would you agree? I mean, this looks like it's got to be the offensive line now, right? With Pritchett maybe taking that right tackle spot. We did see Formby and Vandemark run a little bit with the ones. I know Sheridan was asked about that and the decision behind that. He said both of them have earned those opportunities. But I feel like when they're trotting out there against Georgia, unless there's an injury, the 5 we saw against Wisconsin feels like it's pretty confidently the 5.
Definitely with, Proctor staying at left tackle. I could still see, I think it's good to have Formby there. And I know he's not a popular name among Alabama fans after that South Florida game, but I think it's good to have him kind of hovering there and pushing Elijah Pritchett, because I think, you still need to see that on a consistent basis from Pritchett. I do think it's probably going to be Pritchett from here on out. I think he's starting to maybe the light bulb went off for him. And I like what they got from him. And I like this starting 5 moving forward. But I think it is good to have Formby there. It's good to have him kind of have those two push each other. But at the same time, you like to see this starting 5 get some reps, gel together, because I think it's only going to get better if it does.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I think Pritchett, it kind of feels like the corner's starting to be turned a little bit there. We can go back to the defense if you want, Tony, but briefly, we got to talk special teams for a second, because maybe the player of the game, who maybe deserved to get mentioned before 16 minutes into this podcast. And if it's a closer game, we're talking about it a lot more. James Burnip, my goodness, the punts he was hitting, everyone was clean. I remember we were in the press box and the Seattle Seahawks GM, John Schneider, was in there. Apparently they had 3 scouts in attendance watching players. By the end of that, if I'm John Schneider, I'm saying we got to take that punter in the 5th round. I mean, James Burnip had a hell of a day. And then the other one, not as good on the stat sheet, but Graham Nicholson attempted his first field goal, missed it. DeBoer said they overcalculated the wind, and the kick he thought looked good. Excuses? What are your thoughts?
Blame the wind, blame the sun too. No, yeah. I think you can't just get first of all, go ahead and get carried away with James Burnip, because he is the real deal and is just a consistent punter. And I think he's got 8 of his 14 punts have been dropped inside the 20. Only 1 of his 14 punts have been returned this season. So it's not just like he's averaging, I think, like 47, which is kind of a deceiving number sometimes, because if you're trying to pin him, you're not always going for distance. But 47 is still a good number, and no returns, or 1 return for 4 yards. That's good. That means that he's kicking them high and kicking them long, and so he really is flipping the field. I mean, it's tough. I don't know, like, being an NFL punter, it's like there's only a few jobs available, so you'll have to see. But I wonder if, I guess it's working now, but like there's a lot of like punts he has in his bag rugby style that I think Nick Saban didn't like let him kind of utilize. I wonder if maybe there's we talked about the extra wrinkles in the defense, extra wrinkles in offense. Maybe there's some extra wrinkles in the special teams where you can buy a little bit more time by having him run out or do some weird kicks that are going to bounce, because I mean those are in his bag. He's just really never used them at Alabama, just that Nick Saban's kind of more traditional in that regard. So be interesting, but I think he's the real deal. I've been kind of singing his praises, throughout his career as he's gotten better and better. And then Graham Nicholson, I think you don't get carried away with, because it's 1 kick. I mean, this is a guy that he only missed 1 field goal last year. He made 25 straight last year at NCAA single season record. I have to go back and watch it because it's harder to see from the city. He didn't miss that kick by like a wide margin, right? I mean, he barely missed that kick to the right. So I think it's a case of Will Reichard missed his first kick with Alabama too. I mean, maybe it's a good sign. We'll see how he responds, because he's probably going to have some high pressure field goals, and you can't miss field goals in a game like Georgia. So we'll see how he's able to respond. That's one thing that Will Reichard was able to do, was bounce back. So I'm not worried about that. And then the other debut that we saw on the special teams was Ryan Williams returning his first punt. As exciting as that was, listening to Kalen DeBoer today, it doesn't seem like that's going to be a regular thing. Alabama's trying a few different punters while Cole Adams is dealing with his arm injury. Obviously Jalen Mbakwe's been the main guy there. I would expect Jalen Mbakwe to keep that role. I think they just wanted to get Ryan Williams a rep in case they needed, him to step in a bigger game. I don't think you want to risk your top playmaker on offense. I guess outside of Jalen Milroe, you don't want to risk that on punt return. And so it's good to get him a rep or two. But I think the real thing is I think they're probably safer, going with Jalen Mbakwe, who can make a few plays of his own. I mean, he's a really dynamic punt returner as well. So, and then possibly, it could go back to Cole Adams once he gets healthy. So they've got options, but a lot of interesting special teams news coming of a Monday. And in fact, we mentioned, you talked about us not mentioning James Burnap soon enough. Kalen DeBoer singled him out in his opening statement. He did. Well, yeah, that was interesting. That's how many times would you have, you've never seen Nick Saban just talk about his punter in his opening statement. That was credit to Kalen DeBoer for kind of realizing that and then giving credit where it's due, because it's been one of Alabama's strengths this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm all for special teams news. I'm glad you brought up the Ryan Williams thing too, because he was very much like, yeah, we like to get him that one rep. We always like to get the players their one rep. He very much emphasized that it is probably going to just be the one rep for Ryan.
We'll see now, if Mbakwe got hurt or something like that, then yeah, maybe. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. He kind of mentioned Jeremy Bernard. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a rep here and, just to show that he can do it. Maybe not against Georgia, but let's say if Cole Adams is still dealing with an injury against Vanderbilt, wouldn't be surprised if you put Jeremy back there just to get him that, like you said, that one rep to show that he can do it.
I want to ask you, switching back to the defensive side briefly, about something Kane Womack said on Monday that, looking at Wisconsin, again, not a super easy team or good team to really judge this by. They were 18 for 31 passing, 141 yards. Most of that came with a backup quarterback. But Kane Womack said Monday, straight up that he's felt really proud of where some of the younger defensive backs have come for Alabama. Xavier Brown recovered the fumble that Malachi Moore forced on offense. So I'm just curious your thoughts on their progress, because I feel like we heard them and talked about them so much as a unit that was going to be really scrutinized. And again, just like everyone else, the real tests are now starting. The season really starts here now. Ken Womack talked about the experience being finite. He always mentions that, and how now, you have to just lean on what you've been able to experience so far and do the best you can in a game or against a team like Georgia. But what have you thought just about some of these younger DBs? You mentioned Mbakwe Brown making a few plays.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've been solid, and I think it's a good mixture of the younger defenders, not just the DBs, but the younger defenders kind of learning off the older defenders, and it's kind of been a nice balance. And I've been impressed with what I've seen from Alabama's defense. I've actually, as much as the offense has made a lot of noise, I've probably been more impressed with the defense this season than I have with the offense. So I think it's only going to get better. But yeah, there's a lot of encouragement. You look at Xavier Brown. You look at Jalen Mbakwe. But we've seen them rotate so much at that position. We've even seen some Xavier Mincy as well. So I mean, they've been able to kind of move people in and out, and I've been pretty impressed with what I've seen. So I think that there's going to be some, there's obviously still going to be some growth, and there might even still be a little bit of growing pains from here to there, especially when they start facing a quarterback that, they really haven't faced a quarterback that can test them the way that they will when SEC play goes. So I think that, part of that is getting used to that, and there might be a little bit of a growing pain, like I said, but I think there's a lot of encouragement, and you would think with how young this defense is that it's going to get better and better and better as they get more experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the veteran core they're behind is just so great. And we saw that in full force. I mean, even LT Overton being a transfer is one. You mentioned John Campbell, Deontay Lawson recovered a fumble, Malachi Moore recovered a fumble. I think those vets all look so great. And I think it was good to see them step up in the first road game, kind of set the example a little bit for for what it takes to play against a quality team on the road. Um, do want to ask about injuries because we had a couple, obviously, going into the game, guys like Cole Adams, but then we had a couple, of course, happen in the game. Quay Russaw, Malachi Moore, Richard Young, all kind of suffered knocks. We've written about it a little bit. What's kind of the latest there with that group of players? And obviously you have a bye now, so you have that as an extra little week of recovery. But how's the injury status looking?
Yeah, I think the open week will help Alabama. Obviously, I mean that makes sense. Yeah, they said that last week, starting with Cole Adams because that's where Kalen DeBoer started. He said that he dodged some bullets there. With how bad like that we all saw the replay, or if you haven't, it's pretty gruesome looking on TV where his elbow kind of buckles. I don't think that injury was as bad as it looked. So I think that's good. Maybe you get him back by Georgia, but I don't think that's necessarily a long-term injury. But I don't think, I think having that extra week might allow it to be a Georgia thing. I think you're going to, probably find that out at the end of the week. That's kind of what Kalen DeBoer was talking about when he was addressing Cole Adams, is more like they don't want to rush him back and they don't want to, have him do anything that he's not comfortable doing, but they're going to see at the end of the week. Alabama's going to be off Monday, Tuesday, and I think they're going to do some like non-field stuff on Wednesday, and then they're going to be back on the field for Thursday and Friday and Saturday. So, I think when you look at it, you're going to start evaluating him a little bit more on those Thursday, Friday, see where he's at before you start looking at him for the Georgia game. Quay Russaw, kind of the same thing. He injured his leg and didn't return to the field after being helped off. The board said that the open week was huge there, and that he might be able to do some things for them. That's another thing. That's probably the one out of this whole group that I would be kind of worried about getting him the most, getting him back the most. I think he's somebody that you're definitely going to need against Georgia. So it's kind of the same thing with Cole Adams, where at the end of the week, you might be able to see a little bit more of what he's able to do. If he's able to go through some stuff on Thursday, Friday, I feel like you start feeling a little bit better about his ability to kind of kick it into full gear again the following week. Malachi Moore is dealing with a concussion syndrome, so I think he'll be fine. It's just a matter of doing the right steps and being smart and careful and taking that seriously, and not just being smart with that. And then the last one that Kalen DeBoer talked about was Richard Young, who injured his leg. That one seems a little bit more doubtful. Kalen DeBoer didn't give us a ton of clarity on that one, and normally that with him, that seems to mean that it could be not as great. We'll just have to see. That's Alabama's third back, so it's I'm not losing anyone's a big deal, but they'll definitely be able to overcome that if Richard Young does have to miss a certain amount of time. But we'll just have to see. He didn't necessarily say he was going to be out, but I think you read the tea leaves a little bit. It didn't look as promising for Richard Young as it did maybe those other three.
Yeah, that is sort of what we have to do is read the tea leaves. Like you said, with some of these injury reports. So we'll see. But I think overall for a team 3 weeks into the season, they're actually not doing too bad. Any final thoughts just on Wisconsin? Any final takeaways? And then I want to ask you briefly about Georgia, because they ended up playing a team a little closer than Wisconsin did, or than Alabama did with Wisconsin. But yeah, any final takeaways from their game against the Badgers?
Yeah, I think Wisconsin's actually the second best team they've played this year. I think South Florida would beat Wisconsin if they played, maybe on a neutral field. So I think it's right about where it should be. I think Alabama played them the way that they, especially without Tyler Van Dyke. I think they did what they should do against a team like that. And sometimes you don't always do what you're supposed to do against a team like that when you're playing on the road. And so credit to Alabama for coming in to a hostile environment and just handling business the way it should against a team that I thought it really overpowered. I think you take away the Big Ten and the history of Wisconsin, and you just look at the players on the field. I think Alabama overmatched them. This was never going to be a close game. So I thought that they just did what they're supposed to do. Unlike the South Florida game where they hung around too long. Yeah, it's like I said, you really can't tell too much until that Georgia game, because I think that's if Alabama plays like this against Georgia, I mean, I think they have a decent shot. Obviously Georgia is going to challenge them a lot more than Wisconsin did, but I think the way Alabama played, yeah, they could definitely beat Georgia, especially inside Bryant-Denny Stadium. So we'll just have to see. But yeah, that Georgia game is going to be absolutely huge.
Yeah, so I think it's a good point to segue, and I just your general thoughts on what you heard about how these coaches are kind of approaching the bye. You've got Georgia on a bye week this week as well, and shakes things up. Georgia kind of doing what Georgia does once every single year, which is a scare against a weaker seeming SEC opponent. They beat Kentucky 13-12, which I don't care who's playing and how much one team is favored. That is a disgusting score line. And I pity anyone who had to watch that game. But Georgia kind of does this. They did this to Kentucky this year. I remember it was Auburn, I think, last year. They've done it with Missouri a couple of times. I think they were down 14-3 against South Carolina one year and had to come back. So, the Georgia scare game has already kind of happened, but I don't think any of those previously had happened the week before they were going to, or I guess 2 weeks before they were going to play Alabama. What are you thinking in almost 2 weeks still until this game is happening, and you've got a bye week? How helpful is that for Bama? And you mentioned you maybe like this team to do something. Now, obviously, Georgia too might be coming in with an extra chip because, of course, they got bumped down to number 2 on the
Yeah,
AP.
and Georgia's going to have an open week too. So I mean, it's just going to be two teams preparing for each other for 2 weeks. I think there's two ways to look at that Georgia Kentucky game. I think if you're from a pro Georgia perspective, you look at that and you say, oh, that's the best case scenario because now they're woken up. They sleptwalked a little bit, and now they're going to be firing up. They're going to have a point to prove, and that'll be a good time for Kirby Smart to be like, see, this is what happens. On the other side, and maybe what Alabama fans can quietly have some optimism is a lot of times we say that about teams like, oh, they just need to get woken up. They just need to get woken up, and then like it's just really a sign of a flawed team. I mean,
Yeah.
what if this Georgia team doesn't move the ball as well as we thought it was? But what if Carson Beck isn't really, and what if he's just a good passer and not an elite passer? And what if this offensive line for Georgia isn't as, outstanding as we thought they were? I'm not saying any of those things are true. I'm just, that's what a game like this kind of raises those questions. The same way that, the South Florida game raised a lot of questions about Alabama, do you think that Alabama was able to do everything it did against Wisconsin because it was just magically woken up from a South Florida game? I don't necessarily think that was the case, So, it's interesting. I think there's probably a little bit of both. I think, it does provide Kirby Smart a chance to, provide, to dish out
Do what he does.
Yeah, and to kind of wake up his players. But at the same time, I mean, I do think that there probably is some growth that needs to happen on Georgia, just like there's some growth that needs to happen on Alabama. I don't think, Georgia moved down to number 2 in the nation, and I actually think that that's fair. I think that they're not playing like the number 1 team in the nation. Now, it doesn't matter because if they're playing at their capability at the end of the year, they're going to be tough to beat. And let's not get carried away with disparaging Georgia or by any means. Like, they haven't allowed a touchdown yet. I mean, the defense is rock solid. 3 games without allowing a touchdown is really something. So we'll just see if they're gonna. This is the most explosive offense that they faced by far. But we'll have to see. The one thing though, and I asked Kalen DeBoer about this, but he's had a very good record in these big marquee games. I mean, they beat Oregon the last 2 years. They beat them twice last year. They beat Texas twice, in both years, so he does well in big games with, all the pressure and the lights and stuff. So he's obviously, he credited it to his players and his coaching staff. But I think also, Kalen DeBoer is pretty good about getting his team mentally prepared for these big ones. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see, kind of like what he does. And, when we talk to the players later this week, it'd be nice. I'm interested to see what the vibe is, how anxious, how confident they are heading into this one.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where the season starts. You're right. To go back to what you said earlier, it is, it truly will feel like when this game kicks off, it's like, all right, we're here. Every game is massive now. These teams got over these hurdles, whether it was limped over them or jumped over them with flying or passed them with flying colors, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's gonna be a fun one in Bryant Denny in a couple of weeks with these teams coming off of buys, trying to get healthy and all that stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had. I won the picks this week. I had 4-2. I believe it was Kansas State and the Texas A&M. You're taking a flyer on DJ Lagway. Did not work for you with Florida. Just talking SEC, but
yeah, it's probably good to not pick Florida anymore.
Yeah, they are
really any team except for Miami from Florida. Let's just not
in Florida, in the state of Florida. Yeah, you are right. I would agree. Any other closing things? We'll probably come back midweek and just do a check-in, but we're counting down the days. Stay patient, Alabama fans.
You got to be optimistic from an Alabama perspective heading out. You get three wins. You did what you're supposed to do, and now we'll see what they can do, against a true elite, contender.
You don't have to sweat the bye week. You can just enjoy the football, take the day off, replenish like Alabama's trying to do on the field. You can, maybe you don't have to worry about a tailgate or planning something big for watching the game. You can just sit on your couch, put on a sweater, turn on the games, just chill out. So that's nice. Everyone's got to enjoy the bye week. We will do so as well. We'll be back though. Like Tony said, we've got players. We'll have Hey Coach. There'll be plenty of content still in the bye week over on for the bye week over on Tide Illustrated. Prepping the big old list for recruiting as well. Georgia, that's going to be a big one. So go over to subscribe to Tide Illustrated for that. Subscribe here, and we will see you next time.